The breakfast crowd at Willow Creek Café fell silent the moment the chair scraped across the floor. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Coffee cups froze in mid-air. On a grey Saturday morning in a small town outside Louisville, Kentucky, everyone suddenly understood they were witnessing something ugly. A 28-year-old deputy named Travis Mercer stood over an older black man seated at the counter. Travis was not on duty, but he carried himself as if the town belonged to him. His father, Sheriff Harold Mercer, had controlled local law enforcement for nearly 15 years. Most people avoided crossing either man. It was easier that way. The older man, 70-year-old Daniel Brooks, folded his newspaper with calm precision. His silver hair was neatly trimmed. His denim jacket looked worn but clean. Every Saturday for nearly a decade, he arrived at the same time, sat in the same seat, and drank the same black coffee served by the cafe owner before he even ordered it. "You heard me," Travis said loudly. "That stool isn't for people like you." The words settled over the room like cold rain. Nobody moved. Nobody challenged him. Several customers lowered their eyes toward their plates. Others stared through the windows as if something fascinating had appeared outside. Daniel slowly lifted his gaze. His face showed neither fear nor anger. Years earlier, he had learned how dangerous emotions could become when placed in the wrong hands. The calmness irritated Travis immediately. "I've eaten breakfast here every Saturday for years," Daniel replied. "I'll probably be here next Saturday too." A few customers exchanged nervous glances. The answer was respectful, yet firm. It denied Travis the reaction he wanted. Martha Reynolds, the cafe owner, tightened her grip on the coffee pot. She had built Willow Creek Cafe from nothing after losing her husband decades earlier. The business represented every sacrifice she had ever made. Watching this confrontation unfold inside her dining room filled her with quiet rage. Outside, low clouds hung over the Kentucky countryside. The old brick storefronts along Main Street looked muted beneath the dull morning light. The town presented itself as friendly and traditional. Yet beneath that image lingered tensions few residents openly discussed. Daniel knew those tensions well. He had spent most of his life avoiding unnecessary conflict. He volunteered at community events, mentored local teenagers, and attended church every Sunday. Most people knew him as a polite retiree who enjoyed gardening and fishing. Very few knew anything about the years before that. Very few knew where he had served, what he had survived, or whose lives depended on decisions he once made. Travis stepped closer. "Maybe you're not understanding me." The deputy placed both hands on the counter and leaned forward. The smell of tobacco and cheap cologne drifted across the space between them. Daniel remained seated. "I understand perfectly," he said. That answer pushed Travis over the edge. Without warning, he grabbed Daniel's jacket and yanked him from the stool. The chair crashed sideways. A coffee mug shattered across the floor. Gasps echoed through the cafe. Daniel stumbled but managed to keep his balance. Decades of discipline remained hidden inside muscles that had grown older but never forgotten. Travis shoved him toward the entrance. Nobody intervened. The brass bell above the door rang sharply as Daniel was pushed outside onto the sidewalk. His knee struck concrete. Pain shot through his leg. His jacket tore near the shoulder. Travis laughed. Inside the cafe, silence remained. Daniel slowly rose to his feet. He brushed dust from his clothing and looked across the street toward a weathered pickup truck parked beneath a maple tree. His expression never changed. What nobody in Willow Creek understood that morning was simple. The quiet man they had just watched being humiliated was carrying a past powerful enough to change every life in that town. And before the day ended, a secret hidden for decades would force the entire community to confront the truth about courage, power, and the cost of remaining silent. Daniel Brooks drove home through rolling Kentucky farmland, beneath a sky heavy with approaching rain. The windshield wipers moved slowly across the glass as he replayed the morning inside his mind. Not the insults, not the shove, not even the humiliation. What troubled him most was the silence. 12 people had watched. 12 people had seen exactly what happened. Not one had spoken. His small farmhouse sat outside town, near a creek lined with sycamore trees. The white paint had faded over the years. The porch sagged slightly on one side. It was not impressive, but it was home. His wife, Evelyn Brooks, opened the front door before he reached the steps. They had been married 42 years. She immediately noticed the torn jacket. "Daniel," she whispered. Her eyes moved to the scrape on his knee. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around him. Inside the house, the smell of fresh coffee lingered from breakfast. Family photographs covered the walls. Pictures of children, grandchildren, church picnics, fishing trips, and holidays documented a life built carefully over decades. Daniel sat at the kitchen table while Evelyn cleaned the cuts on his hands. "What happened?" she finally asked. He told her everything, not dramatically, not emotionally, just facts. When he finished, Evelyn sat quietly, then tears filled her eyes. "After everything you gave this country," she said softly. Daniel looked toward the window. The rain had started. "That's not what hurts," he answered. "Then what does? The people who looked away." Meanwhile, across town, Travis Mercer sat in a booth at Willow Creek café, feeling pleased with himself. Several customers had already left. Others avoided eye contact. He mistook their discomfort for respect. His friend and fellow deputy, Eric Nolan, sat across from him. "You think that was smart?" Eric asked. Travis laughed. "Who's going to do anything?" The answer seemed obvious. Nobody. That confidence lasted exactly 27 minutes, because at that moment, Martha Reynolds was making phone calls. Not to reporters, not to lawyers, not even to the sheriff's department. She was calling people who knew Daniel Brooks long before Willow Creek existed. People who remembered stories Daniel never discussed. People who understood why several photographs hanging in government buildings across America featured a younger version of the same quiet man. One of those calls reached retired Colonel Michael Hayes in Washington, D.C. Another reached former Secretary of Veterans Affairs Thomas Grant. A third reached General Marcus Bennett. By noon, all three men had spoken. By 1 o'clock, others were making calls. Questions spread rapidly. Had it really happened? Was Daniel truly the victim? Was the video real? Because unknown to Travis, two customers had recorded nearly everything. One video captured the confrontation inside the cafe. The second showed Daniel being shoved onto the sidewalk. The footage began spreading across social media before lunchtime. Thousands watched, then tens of thousands. The comments multiplied quickly. People recognized Daniel, not everyone, but enough. Military veterans recognized his face from documentaries. Historians recognized his name. Former soldiers recognized the story attached to him. The same question appeared repeatedly. Is that Daniel Brooks? Back at the farmhouse, Daniel remained unaware. He sat on the porch while rain tapped gently against the roof. The quiet felt comforting. Until a black SUV appeared at the end of the driveway, then another, then a third. Evelyn stepped outside beside him. Daniel's expression changed for the first time all day. Not fear, recognition. The lead vehicle stopped. A tall African-American man in a formal military uniform stepped out. 4 silver stars gleamed on his shoulders. General Marcus Bennett had traveled from Washington personally, and judging by the look on his face, what happened at the cafe was about to become far bigger than anyone in Willow Creek could imagine. The 3 black SUVs remained parked in front of Daniel Brooks' farmhouse as rain drifted across the Kentucky countryside. The scene looked almost unreal against the quiet backdrop of old fences, muddy fields, and distant tree lines. General Marcus Bennett climbed the porch steps alone. No aides followed, no cameras accompanied him. This was not a public appearance. This was personal. Daniel stood as the general approached. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then General Bennett extended his hand. "It's good to see you again, Daniel." Daniel smiled faintly. "I wish it were under better circumstances." The general nodded. "So do I." Inside the farmhouse, Evelyn prepared coffee while the 2 men sat at the kitchen table. The rain continued outside, creating a steady rhythm against the windows. General Bennett placed a tablet on the table. "Have you seen what's happening online?" Daniel shook his head. "No." The general turned the screen toward him. The first video had already surpassed 2 million views. The second was approaching 3 million. News organizations from Louisville, Cincinnati, Chicago, Atlanta, and New York were sharing the footage. Daniel watched quietly. He saw Travis grabbing his jacket. He saw himself fall. He saw customers looking away. He saw something he had missed earlier. Fear. Not his own, theirs. The faces inside the cafe showed fear. The kind that develops when people spend years learning that speaking up carries consequences. General Bennett studied him carefully. "You're not angry." Daniel remained silent for several seconds. "Anger is easy," he finally replied. "What is difficult?" Daniel looked out the window. "Disappointment." The answer lingered in the room. Across town, conditions were becoming increasingly uncomfortable for Sheriff Harold Mercer. His office phone had not stopped ringing. Local reporters wanted statements. State officials wanted explanations. Veterans organizations demanded accountability. Every hour seemed to bring new pressure. The sheriff sat alone behind his desk. For the first time in years, he felt control slipping away. He called his son. Travis answered immediately. "Dad, this whole thing is ridiculous." "Do you know who that man is?" Harold asked. A long pause followed. "Some retired veteran?" The sheriff closed his eyes. "Son, he's more than that. I don't care what medals he has." "You should." The sheriff's voice carried genuine concern now, because people in Washington care. Meanwhile, television networks continued investigating Daniel's background. Reporters uncovered pieces of a story hidden from public attention for decades. Military records revealed extraordinary service. 3 combat deployments, multiple commendations, leadership positions that placed him in situations most Americans could never imagine. Yet Daniel had spent retirement avoiding publicity. He declined interviews. He rejected speaking engagements. He rarely discussed his military career. That decision had earned respect among fellow veterans. Now it made the story even more powerful. People admired humility, especially when contrasted against arrogance. By evening, national media trucks arrived in Willow Creek. Satellite equipment appeared along Main Street. Reporters filled hotel rooms in neighboring towns. The community suddenly found itself at the center of a national conversation. Inside Willow Creek Café, Martha Reynolds watched the coverage from a small television mounted above the counter. Several customers sat quietly. The atmosphere felt different. Heavy. Thoughtful. One elderly man finally broke the silence. "We should have said something." Nobody argued, because everyone knew he was right. Hours later, after darkness settled across Kentucky, Daniel sat alone on his porch. The rain had stopped. Crickets filled the night air. A truck slowly approached along the gravel road. Daniel recognized the vehicle immediately. Sheriff Harold Mercer stepped out. For once, the powerful lawman carried no confidence. No authority, no certainty, just worry. He walked toward the porch and stopped several feet away. Then he said 4 words Daniel never expected to hear. "I need your help." The porch light cast a warm circle across the weathered wooden boards as Sheriff Harold Mercer stood facing Daniel Brooks. The confidence that usually accompanied him had vanished. For the first time in years, he looked like an aging man carrying a burden he could no longer hide. Daniel remained seated. "You need my help?" he asked. Harold nodded. The admission seemed painful. "Things are moving faster than I expected." Daniel almost smiled. That's usually what happens when the truth finally catches up. The sheriff lowered his eyes. For several moments, only the sounds of distant insects filled the silence. Finally, Harold sat down on the edge of the porch steps. "I won't defend what happened," he said. "Good, because you can't." The sheriff accepted the answer. Years ago, he would have argued. Tonight, he lacked the energy. The pressure surrounding him had become overwhelming. State investigators had already requested departmental records. Several former officers were suddenly willing to speak. Reporters were digging through years of complaints, and worst of all, videos continued spreading across the country. Millions had now watched his son drag a 70-year-old man from a café. Harold rubbed his forehead. "My son is an idiot." Daniel looked at him carefully. "Your son became what years of protection allowed him to become." The words landed harder than any accusation, because they were true. Across town, Travis Mercer sat alone inside his apartment. The television remained off. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages flooded social media. Some came from strangers, others came from former friends. people he had known his entire life. Most were not supportive. For the first time, Travis realized something uncomfortable. Fear worked differently when it pointed in the opposite direction. He had spent years watching others worry about consequences. Now he was discovering what that felt like personally. At midnight, another development changed everything. A major national news network released a feature about Daniel Brooks. The story included interviews with military veterans who had served under him. One retired colonel described Daniel as the bravest leader he had ever known. Another called him the reason dozens of soldiers returned home alive. A former combat medic fought tears while speaking. "People see an old man now," she said. "They don't understand how many families still have mothers, fathers, sons and daughters because of him." The interview spread rapidly. By sunrise, Daniel Brooks had become a national symbol, not because he wanted attention, because his dignity stood in sharp contrast to the ugliness people witnessed on video. The following morning, Willow Creek awakened to a completely different reality. National reporters occupied nearly every corner of Main Street. Residents gathered outside businesses, discussing little else. Church leaders organized community meetings. Veterans drove from neighboring counties simply to show support. Meanwhile, state investigators arrived at the sheriff's department. They carried boxes, folders, legal documents, and search warrants. Employees watched nervously as records were collected. Computer systems were copied. Personnel files disappeared into evidence containers. Rumors spread throughout the building. Something bigger was happening. Far bigger. That afternoon, Martha Reynolds closed Willow Creek Café for the first time in 6 years. A handwritten sign appeared on the front door. "Closed today, time for reflection." People stopped to read it. Many stood silently afterward because everyone understood the message. Reflection was exactly what the town needed. Late that evening, Daniel received another visitor. This time it was not a general, not a politician, not a reporter. A young woman stepped onto his porch carrying a small camera bag. She introduced herself as Rachel Morgan, 32 years old, investigative journalist, Chicago native. She had spent months researching misconduct complaints throughout rural America. Then she opened a folder and placed several documents on the table. Daniel looked down. Every page contained complaints involving Travis Mercer, but there was something else. Names, dates, witness statements, a pattern. Rachel's expression turned serious. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "your case isn't the first one." Daniel studied the papers. Then he noticed something disturbing. One name appeared repeatedly. A name connected not only to Travis, but also to Sheriff Harold Mercer himself. And suddenly, the events at the cafe no longer looked like an isolated incident. They looked like the beginning of something much darker. Rachel Morgan spread the documents across Daniel Brooks's kitchen table while evening shadows stretched across the room. The farmhouse felt unusually quiet. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed louder than normal. Daniel adjusted his reading glasses and began reviewing the files. The deeper he looked, the worse the pattern became. Every complaint shared similar details. Traffic stops without cause, unlawful searches, threats, intimidation, missing paperwork. And nearly every investigation ended the same way. No action taken, case closed. Rachel watched his expression carefully. "I've spent 8 months researching this," she explained. "Why?" Daniel asked. "Because nobody else was." The answer was simple and honest. Rachel pointed towards several highlighted reports. Most journalists ignored small-town complaints. They weren't dramatic enough. Then your video appeared. Suddenly everyone cared. Daniel nodded slowly. The truth carried an uncomfortable weight. Sometimes people only listened after a camera started recording. Evelyn entered with fresh coffee and quietly joined the conversation. Rachel showed her another document: a local teacher, a church volunteer, a construction worker. Several residents claimed Travis Mercer had harassed them repeatedly over the years. Many eventually stopped filing complaints altogether. They believed nothing would change, and until now they had been correct. The following morning brought another surprise. Daniel's phone rang shortly after sunrise. The caller was Judge Rebecca Lawson from Frankfurt. She served on a state oversight commission reviewing law enforcement misconduct. Her voice carried unusual urgency. "Mr. Brooks, we're opening a formal inquiry." Daniel remained quiet. "This isn't only about your case anymore," she continued. "What is it about?" A pause followed. "We're finding evidence that records may have been intentionally altered for years." Daniel looked toward the window. A cold realization settled over him. Corruption rarely stayed contained. It spread, like water finding cracks in a foundation. Meanwhile, Sheriff Harold Mercer faced his own growing nightmare. Investigators occupied multiple offices inside the department. Former employees had started cooperating. Retired deputies were speaking openly. One former administrator provided emails. Another provided internal memos. A third delivered archived files nobody realized still existed. Every new discovery increased pressure. Harold spent the day answering questions. By afternoon, he understood something terrible. The investigation was no longer focused on his son. It was focused on him. Across Willow Creek, residents struggled with their own feelings. Church services that Sunday felt different. Conversations after worship became unusually honest. People discussed fear, responsibility, silence. Several individuals admitted they should have spoken sooner. Others confessed they had witnessed questionable behavior for years. A few even acknowledged benefiting from the system because it targeted somebody else. Those conversations proved uncomfortable, but necessary. On Monday evening, Willow Creek Café reopened. The first customer through the door surprised everyone: Daniel Brooks. The room fell silent when he entered, not because people feared him, because they respected him. Daniel walked calmly to his usual stool. The same seat, the same place where everything began. Martha poured coffee before he even sat down. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then an elderly customer stood from a nearby booth. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly. Daniel looked up. The man swallowed hard. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything that morning." The room grew still. Then another customer stood, then another. One by one, people offered apologies. Not rehearsed, not dramatic, just honest. Daniel listened carefully. When the final person finished speaking, he wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "Courage isn't about never being afraid," he said. "It's about deciding something matters more than fear." Nobody forgot those words. Yet while healing slowly began inside the cafe, darker developments emerged elsewhere. That night, Rachel Morgan called Daniel again. Her voice sounded different, concerned, almost alarmed. "I found something," she said. "What?" Several seconds passed. Then she answered, "A witness disappeared 6 years ago after filing a complaint against the department." Daniel sat upright. The silence between them suddenly felt heavy. Rachel continued. "Officially, he moved away." "And unofficially?" Rachel looked down at the file in front of her. "Unofficially, nobody has seen him since." For the first time since the incident at the cafe, Daniel felt a chill run through his body. Because the story was no longer about misconduct. It was becoming something far more dangerous. Rachel Morgan arrived at Daniel Brooks' farmhouse before sunrise, carrying a thick binder filled with notes, interviews, and public records. The Kentucky morning was cold and damp. Fog drifted across nearby fields, hiding sections of the landscape beneath a gray blanket. Daniel invited her inside. The concern on her face immediately caught his attention. Rachel placed the binder on the kitchen table. "His name was Anthony Reed," she said. Daniel listened carefully. Anthony had been a 38-year-old mechanic living outside Willow Creek 6 years earlier. According to official records, he relocated to Arizona after filing a complaint against the sheriff's department. The paperwork appeared normal. Almost too normal. That detail had attracted Rachel's attention. "Nobody remembers him leaving," she explained. "What do they remember?" Daniel asked. "They remember him being terrified." Rachel opened the binder. Inside were transcripts from interviews with former neighbors. Several claimed Anthony feared retaliation after accusing deputies of misconduct. Others recalled him discussing evidence he planned to deliver to state authorities. Then suddenly he disappeared. No farewell, no moving trucks, no forwarding address. Nothing. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Years of military service had taught him to recognize patterns, and this pattern bothered him deeply. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining records inside the sheriff's department. The deeper they dug, the more inconsistencies appeared. Missing reports, deleted files, unexplained financial transactions, evidence logs containing gaps that could not be explained. State officials quietly expanded the investigation. What began as a review of one incident had evolved into something much larger. Sheriff Harold Mercer felt pressure from every direction. For days he barely slept. His attorneys advised caution. His political allies stopped returning calls. Reporters camped outside his office. Each morning brought another damaging headline. Yet none of that frightened him as much as Anthony Reed's name resurfacing. Because Harold remembered Anthony very clearly. Across town, community conversations continued growing more honest. People gathered in churches, libraries, and town meetings. For years they had avoided difficult subjects. Now avoidance no longer seemed possible. One evening, nearly 200 residents attended a public forum at the high school gymnasium. The discussion lasted 4 hours. Stories emerged. Some involved unfair treatment, others described intimidation, many involved fear. Several speakers fought back tears. Others expressed regret for remaining silent. Daniel attended quietly from the back row. He never approached the microphone, he simply listened. The experience reminded him of something he learned decades earlier. Healing begins only after people tell the truth, even when the truth hurts. The next day brought a major breakthrough. Rachel received a phone call from a retired state employee living near Cincinnati. The woman had seen news coverage about Willow Creek. She believed she possessed information connected to Anthony Reed. Rachel drove north immediately. Daniel accompanied her. The retired employee lived alone in a modest home overlooking the Ohio River. Her memory remained remarkably sharp. She disappeared into a spare bedroom and returned carrying an old storage box. Inside were copies of archived correspondence scheduled for destruction years earlier. One envelope contained Anthony Reed's signature. Another contained a handwritten statement. Rachel carefully unfolded the pages. As she read, her expression changed. Then she handed them to Daniel. The statement described alleged misconduct inside the sheriff's department. Specific names appeared repeatedly, including Harold Mercer. But one sentence captured Daniel's attention immediately. Anthony claimed he possessed physical evidence stored in a secure location. Evidence capable of exposing years of corruption. The statement ended with a warning. If anything happened to him, investigators should search an abandoned tobacco warehouse located outside town. Rachel looked up slowly. Neither spoke for several seconds. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the river. A storm was approaching, and somewhere inside an abandoned warehouse near Willow Creek, evidence hidden for 6 years might finally reveal the truth everyone had been searching for. Lightning flashed across the Kentucky sky as Daniel Brooks and Rachel Morgan drove toward the abandoned tobacco warehouse mentioned in Anthony Reed's statement. Rain hammered the windshield. Thunder rolled across the countryside. The warehouse sat several miles outside Willow Creek. Decades earlier, it had stored tobacco from surrounding farms. Now it stood empty. Or at least that was what everyone believed. The structure appeared through the storm like a ghost from another era. Broken windows, rusting metal doors, weathered wood darkened by years of rain. Rachel parked near the entrance. Neither spoke for several moments. Both understood the significance of what they might find. If Anthony's statement was accurate, this building could contain evidence connecting years of misconduct to powerful people. If it was inaccurate, they would be standing inside an abandoned warehouse during a thunderstorm for no reason. Daniel grabbed a flashlight. "Let's find out," he said. The front door resisted before finally swinging open. The smell of dust and damp wood filled the air. Water dripped through holes in the roof. Old machinery sat abandoned beneath layers of dirt. Their flashlight beams moved slowly across the darkness. For nearly 30 minutes, they found nothing. Then Rachel noticed something unusual. A section of flooring near the back wall looked newer than the surrounding boards. She knelt beside it. "Daniel." He joined her. The boards had clearly been replaced years earlier. Using an old crowbar found nearby, Daniel carefully lifted them. A hidden compartment appeared beneath the floor. Inside sat 2 metal containers. Both were sealed. Both appeared untouched. Rachel stared in disbelief. Anthony was telling the truth. Back in Willow Creek, news of their discovery spread rapidly after state investigators arrived to secure the scene. The containers were transported directly to a forensic facility. Officials worked through the night. By morning, the contents had been catalogued. The results shocked everyone. Photographs, audio recordings, financial documents, internal correspondence, copies of complaints previously reported missing. The collection spanned nearly a decade. More importantly, many documents carried signatures, dates, official department markings, evidence that could be verified. For investigators, it was a goldmine. For Harold Mercer, it was a disaster. The sheriff received the news shortly after sunrise. His attorney arrived within the hour. Neither man said much. The facts spoke loudly enough. By afternoon, state authorities executed additional search warrants. Several current and former employees received subpoenas. Others retained lawyers. The investigation had entered an entirely new phase. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to a life he never wanted. Television crews waited outside his property. Interview requests arrived hourly. Political leaders called. Veterans organizations invited him to events. He declined almost everything. The attention exhausted him. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Evelyn, he finally voiced what had been bothering him. "I never wanted to become the story." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "You're not the story." "Then what is?" She looked toward the distant lights of town. "The story is what happens when people stop accepting things they know are wrong." Her answer stayed with him. Days later, investigators released another update. Anthony Reed had not simply vanished. Evidence suggested he had attempted multiple times to contact state authorities before disappearing. More importantly, financial records indicated someone had accessed his bank accounts for months after he supposedly left Kentucky. The transactions raised troubling questions. Questions nobody could yet answer. Rachel immediately began digging deeper. Then, late one night, her phone rang. The caller identification displayed an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, she answered. A man's voice spoke quietly, nervously. "My name doesn't matter," he said. "Who is this?" Rachel asked. "Someone who worked for Harold Mercer." Rachel sat upright. The voice continued. "You're looking in the wrong place." Anthony Reed wasn't the biggest secret. A long silence followed, then the caller delivered a sentence that changed everything. There was another file, one even Harold was afraid of. Before Rachel could ask another question, the line went dead, and suddenly the mystery surrounding Willow Creek became even more dangerous than anyone imagined. Rachel Morgan barely slept after the anonymous phone call. The words repeated inside her mind throughout the night. There was another file, one even Harold Mercer was afraid of. By sunrise, she was driving toward Daniel Brooks's farmhouse. The roads were wet from overnight rain. Fog drifted across fields and low valleys. The Kentucky countryside looked peaceful. The reality underneath that peace was becoming increasingly unsettling. Daniel was already awake when she arrived. He stood on the porch holding a coffee mug. One look at Rachel's face told him something had changed. What happened? Rachel told him everything. The anonymous call, the warning, the mention of another file. Daniel listened carefully. When she finished, he remained silent for several moments. "Do you believe him?" Rachel asked. "Yes," Daniel answered. The certainty surprised her. "Why?" Daniel looked toward the distant hills. Because frightened people rarely invent things that make them more frightened. Meanwhile, investigators continued processing evidence recovered from the warehouse. Every day produced new discoveries. Several former deputies had already agreed to cooperate. Internal communications revealed deliberate efforts to suppress complaints. Financial records exposed questionable payments. Political connections, once considered untouchable, were suddenly under scrutiny. The investigation had become front-page news across the country, and yet investigators privately admitted something troubling. They still felt pieces were missing. Important pieces. Later that afternoon, Rachel received another unexpected lead. An elderly attorney named Walter Gaines requested a meeting. He lived in Lexington. For nearly 40 years, he had practiced law throughout Kentucky. More importantly, he once represented Anthony Reed. Rachel and Daniel drove there immediately. Walter's office occupied the second floor of an old brick building overlooking downtown Lexington. The attorney moved slowly but spoke with remarkable clarity. After hearing Rachel's account, he opened a locked cabinet. From the back, he removed a thin folder. Its contents were limited, but one document immediately captured attention. A handwritten note from Anthony Reed, dated only 3 weeks before his disappearance. Daniel carefully read the message. Most of it discussed fears regarding retaliation. Then one sentence stood out. "If anything happens to me, look beneath the courthouse." Rachel frowned. "Beneath the courthouse?" Walter nodded. I never understood what he meant. Neither did Daniel, at least not immediately. Then a memory surfaced. Years ago, Willow Creek's courthouse underwent major renovations. Construction crews discovered unused storage areas beneath the original structure. The spaces were eventually sealed. Most residents forgot they existed. Daniel had not. The realization hit both him and Rachel simultaneously. "The basement," Rachel whispered. Back in Willow Creek, news spread that state investigators planned another search operation. Rumors exploded. Residents gathered outside restaurants, churches, and gas stations discussing possibilities. Nobody knew exactly what authorities were seeking, but everyone sensed something significant was approaching. That evening, Sheriff Harold Mercer finally broke his silence. He appeared outside the department headquarters and delivered a brief public statement. His face looked older than it had only weeks earlier. Exhaustion lined every feature. He denied wrongdoing, denied knowledge of missing evidence, denied involvement in any conspiracy. The statement lasted less than 4 minutes. Few people found it convincing, especially after investigators announced an emergency search warrant for the old courthouse property. The operation began shortly after midnight. Floodlights illuminated the historic building. State police secured the perimeter. Construction crews removed sections of flooring inside a sealed storage area beneath the structure. Reporters waited outside through the night. So did residents. Hours passed. No information emerged. Then, shortly before dawn, activity suddenly increased. Investigators carried several large evidence containers from underground. Their expressions were serious, very serious. By sunrise, Rachel received confirmation from a trusted source. The hidden room beneath the courthouse contained decades of records. Not years. Decades. Some dated back before Harold Mercer even became sheriff. The discovery stunned everyone, but the final detail shocked Rachel most. One sealed box contained photographs, recordings, and documents connected to powerful individuals throughout the state. People far beyond Willow Creek. People with influence, people with resources, people who would do almost anything to keep those records hidden. As Rachel lowered the phone, another call appeared on her screen. Unknown number. She answered. The same nervous voice returned. This time, he sounded terrified. "You found it," he whispered. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded. The man ignored the question. Instead, he delivered a warning. "Get Daniel somewhere safe." Rachel's heart began pounding. Why? Several seconds passed. Then came the answer. Because now they know he won't stop digging. The line disconnected, and for the first time since the incident at Willow Creek Café, Daniel Brooks was no longer just a witness. He had become a target. General Marcus Bennett arrived at Daniel Brooks' farmhouse before noon. This time, he did not come alone. Several federal agents accompanied him. Their presence immediately confirmed what Rachel Morgan already feared. The situation had escalated beyond local corruption. Far beyond it. Daniel listened quietly as the agents explained the latest developments. The evidence discovered beneath the courthouse was generating shockwaves throughout state and federal agencies. Thousands of documents required review. Many involved investigations that had mysteriously disappeared. Others contained allegations against influential individuals. Some records suggested coordinated efforts to suppress complaints across multiple jurisdictions. No one yet understood the full scope, but everyone understood the danger. "Mr. Brooks," one federal investigator said, "we believe certain people may view you as the catalyst behind these discoveries." Daniel almost laughed. "I was eating breakfast." The agent nodded. Sometimes history starts that way. Meanwhile, Willow Creek had become unrecognizable. National news trucks lined Main Street. Federal investigators occupied temporary offices. Residents who once avoided controversy now discussed accountability openly. The entire town seemed caught between embarrassment and determination. Many wished they had acted sooner. Others wondered how much damage could have been prevented. Sheriff Harold Mercer spent most of his days meeting with attorneys. Evidence continued accumulating. Former associates increasingly cooperated with investigators. Several people who once protected him were now protecting themselves. The alliances that sustained his power for years were collapsing, one after another, like dominoes. 3 days later, investigators finally revealed part of what they found beneath the courthouse. The announcement stunned the nation. The hidden archive contained evidence connected to over 70 unresolved complaints. 70. Some involved misconduct. Others involved intimidation. Several involved missing evidence. A few raised disturbing questions about criminal activity that had never been properly investigated. Families across Kentucky began contacting authorities. Old wounds reopened. Long-forgotten cases returned to public attention. People who had spent years believing nobody cared suddenly found themselves being heard. For Daniel, the attention remained uncomfortable. He never viewed himself as a hero. He never sought recognition, yet strangers constantly thanked him. Letters arrived daily. Veterans wrote from across the country. Teachers, police officers, students, parents, many shared similar messages. Your dignity gave us courage. One evening, Daniel sat on his porch reading several of those letters. The sun slowly disappeared behind distant hills. Evelyn joined him. Neither spoke immediately. The quiet felt peaceful, rare, necessary. Finally, Daniel looked toward the horizon. I keep thinking about that morning. Evelyn squeezed his hand. So do I. If I had fought back, none of this would have happened. She shook her head. No. Something else would have happened. Daniel considered that. She was right. The power of that moment came from restraint, from refusing to become what others expected, from preserving dignity when dignity was under attack. The following week brought the final turning point. A federal grand jury completed its review. Multiple indictments were issued. Several current and former officials faced charges: financial crimes, obstruction, civil rights violations, evidence tampering. The list seemed endless. Then came the announcement everyone anticipated. Harold Mercer was formally charged. The news spread nationwide within minutes, but another revelation emerged during the same press conference. Investigators finally solved the mystery surrounding Anthony Reed. Financial records, witness statements, and recovered correspondence confirmed he had not disappeared voluntarily. For years, people believed his story ended in silence. It had not. Authorities had located evidence proving Anthony spent his final months gathering documentation against corruption. His efforts ultimately preserved the records that later exposed the truth. In many ways, the discoveries beneath the courthouse were possible because Anthony never gave up. Daniel listened to the announcement from his living room. When it ended, he lowered the television volume. A photograph on the wall caught his attention. It showed younger versions of himself and Evelyn decades earlier, back when the future remained uncertain, back when courage looked different. As he stared at the picture, his phone rang. The caller was Rachel Morgan. Her voice sounded emotional. "Daniel," she said quietly, "they've scheduled the first hearings." Daniel nodded. Justice was finally moving forward, but neither of them knew the most emotional chapter of the story was still waiting ahead. The first federal hearings began on a cool autumn morning in Louisville. Leaves covered sidewalks in shades of red, gold, and orange. News crews gathered outside the courthouse before sunrise. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for statements. Inside, the atmosphere felt entirely different. Quiet, serious, heavy with consequences. Daniel Brooks arrived early with Evelyn beside him. Neither sought attention, neither stopped for cameras. They simply walked through the courthouse doors together, the same way they had faced every challenge throughout 42 years of marriage. One step at a time. As proceedings began, evidence collected from the warehouse and the hidden courthouse archive filled the courtroom. Documents, photographs, financial records, witness testimony. Years of buried truth finally entered the public record. People who once believed their voices had been ignored listened as their experiences were acknowledged. Many fought tears, some sat silently with hands folded, others simply looked relieved. For the first time in years, they felt seen. The hearings continued for weeks. Each day revealed another layer of deception. Each day exposed another decision made to protect power rather than serve justice. Former officials accepted plea agreements. Others cooperated with investigators. Several attempted to deny responsibility. The evidence made denial impossible. Eventually, Harold Mercer entered the courtroom himself. The man who once seemed untouchable looked exhausted, older, smaller. His years of authority had disappeared, only accountability remained. When asked whether he regretted his decisions, he paused for a long moment. Then he answered quietly, "Every day." The statement did not erase the damage. It did not restore lost trust. But it carried a truth that many people needed to hear. Actions have consequences, even for those who believe themselves above them. Months later, Willow Creek began rebuilding. The process was neither quick nor easy. Trust rarely returns overnight. Yet progress became visible. New oversight systems were established. Community advisory boards were formed. Training standards improved. Residents participated in conversations that once seemed impossible. Most importantly, people stopped pretending problems did not exist. The town learned an important lesson. Silence protects wrongdoing far more effectively than anger ever could. One Saturday morning, nearly a year after the incident, Daniel returned to Willow Creek Café. The bell above the door rang softly. The familiar smell of coffee filled the room. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Customers greeted him warmly, not because he was famous, because he belonged. Martha Reynolds poured coffee into his favorite mug, the same chipped mug she had saved for years. "Morning, Daniel," she said. Daniel smiled. "Morning, Martha." Outside, the town square looked different. The old, empty pedestal no longer stood alone. In its place sat a new monument, not dedicated to politicians, not dedicated to military victories, dedicated to community responsibility. A bronze plaque carried a simple message: courage begins when silence ends. People often stopped to read it. Many stayed longer than expected. They reflected, they remembered, and they considered what they would do if faced with a similar choice. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Evelyn sat together on their farmhouse porch, watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange across distant Kentucky hills. Birds drifted overhead. The world felt peaceful again. Daniel thought about Anthony Reed, about Martha, about Rachel, about every person who eventually found the courage to speak. History would probably remember the investigation, the headlines, the trials, the discoveries. But Daniel believed the real story was much simpler. One act of cruelty revealed years of hidden truth. One moment of dignity inspired others to find their voices, and one community finally decided that looking away was no longer acceptable. The sun disappeared beyond the horizon. Daniel squeezed Evelyn's hand. Neither needed words. Some victories are measured not by applause, but by the quiet knowledge that the next generation will inherit something better. For the first time in a very long while, hope felt stronger than fear. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.